of course, a very special welcome to our fabulous speaker, Professor Joyce Tischler. Hi, Joyce.
Hello.
By way of introduction, I am Amy P. Wilson, and I'm one of the directors and co-founders of Animal Law Reform South Africa, or ALRSA, who's hosting and organizing this event. And I'm also joined by my two wonderful co-directors, Professor Bonita Meyersfeld, who you may have just seen, and Professor David Bilchitz. So we appreciate, I think they're waving now. We appreciate that there is a lot happening in the world right now, and some very difficult times are here with us and are still ahead of us. So we are very happy and grateful to have such a fantastic group of people with us today, interested in finding out more about animal law. And in fact, while we may be separating ourselves physically and socially, we are happy to be connecting with people here from all over the world. We have people from Africa, Asia, North America, South America, Australia, Europe, and various countries within these continents. And of course, we have a very diverse group of participants ranging from students to professors, to lawyers, to NGOs, to activists, and just various other people interested. And before I proceed with introducing our fantastic speaker, I wanted to deal with just a few administrative issues. As you may be aware from the correspondence, we are recording the session, which will be made available to people. And you can decide, as you have already done, whether to put your video on or not. It's completely up to you. We also encourage you throughout the session to use our chat function. You can ask questions, you can leave comments, you can tell us where in the world you're joining from. So please feel free to use that as you will. We will be having a Q&A session towards the end where we'll try to get through as many of the questions as possible. So yeah, just enjoy and feel free, come and learn. Hopefully you can all see the view. If you're having trouble, just toggle with the view button. I'm not sure which browser you have, but usually you'll come right if you fiddle with it enough. Great. We at ALRSA get asked all the time, what is animal law? The answer is unfortunately not so straightforward. However, it is a burgeoning and exciting area of law, and one which I'm very grateful to have as my profession. ALRSA is the first dedicated animal law organization in South Africa, and one of our main goals is to educate and train different stakeholders. We believe animals have intrinsic worth and deserve to have that worth legally protected. Animals, like all vulnerable beings, thus need lawyers. So this is our very first webinar, and we intend to host many more in the future, and we do hope you'll join us for those. We are, of course, extremely grateful to have Professor Joyce Tischler with us today. Joyce is such an inspiration for so many people, and in my view, there really is no better way to describe her other than as a legend. Joyce is fondly referred to as the mother of animal law and has literally paved the way for lawyers as well as others around the world to focus and direct their efforts and their work in animal protection in a meaningful way. Through this, she has helped create an entirely new field of law. She has devoted her career to advancing this field. In 1979, Joyce founded the very first US nonprofit dedicated to protecting animals utilizing the legal system. You may have heard of them. They're called the Animal Legal Defense Fund. She served as ALDF's executive director for 25 years and then its general counsel until her retirement from ALDF in the spring of 2019. Today, Joyce is a professor of practice in animal law at the Center for Animal Law Studies at Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland, Oregon. And you will hear a lot more about them. And I'm also very lucky to be able to work with Joyce at CALS in a different capacity. She teaches industrial animal agriculture law and policy, as well as the fundamentals of animal law, which is a survey course. She has co-authored the textbook Animal Law, New Perspectives on Teaching Traditional Law, and is now co-authoring the very first of its kind casebook on industrial animal agriculture law. So while there's so many other things I could say about her, I'm sure that you want to hear her speak. So I'm going to hand over to Joyce. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you everybody who is here today. I really appreciate it, and so does Amy, that you're so interested in animal law. Animal law can be defined in a number of ways, but we define it as the study of how legal systems view and treat non-human animals. It's a vibrant and growing area of the law. It is a movement of legal professionals who are working to pass laws handle lawsuits, and carry out other projects to bring greater protections and hopefully rights to non-human animals. And I need to share my screen. I apologize, Amy. Okay, hang on a second, everyone. Okay, there's that little chickadee. Okay, with that, I will move on. Humans, nope. Okay, first problem. There, okay, thank you. Humans use and interact with animals in a number of ways, and animal law encompasses all of those ways. I have just a few pictures of some of the ways. And if we're coming to a graphic picture, I will let you know in advance so that you can avert your eyes if you need to. Each year, billions of animals are raised and killed to produce food, meat, dairy, eggs, all of it for human consumption. Not all, but most. In some countries, in Africa and Asia, wild animals are considered a tourist attraction, which is lovely, but they're also hunted, poached, and trapped, either as food or trophies. Animals are used in medical research and the testing of products for human beings. Zoos and circuses keep wild animals in captivity as a form of entertainment, and some of them would argue as an educational tool. And then we have the companion animals. Some people call them pets, most people, I suppose. Dogs, cats, and other companion animals provide us with love, company, affection, and it should come as no surprise that the animals who are closest to us, the companion animals, have the most robust legal protections. Animal law may have started in the US in the 1970s, but it has moved to a number of other countries, as Amy mentioned. I've only practiced in the US, so with apologies, my review of cases is going to be mostly in the US, focus on US laws and cases that I'm familiar with. Animal law is less than 50 years old, and in a field of law, that's very, very young. If you think of the more traditional areas of law, torts, contracts, property, animal law is quite young. And a student who studies animal law comes to understand that it permeates all of those other fields: property, contracts, torts, trusts and estates, even patent law is influenced by animal law. Our legal systems, I love this photo. Our legal systems distinguish between legal persons and property. And humans are legal persons and animals are categorized by us as property. They are essentially a thing under the law. They have very limited, and in some circumstances, no ability to get protection within the legal system. Their fundamental interests can be and often are ignored, which leads to a massive amount of suffering and pain. The best way to explain what animal law is to give you examples, and that's what I'm going to do for the next 35 minutes or so. I can't possibly cover it all. I teach the survey course in animal law, which takes 13 weeks, and even then we can't cover it all. But I'll give you a sneak peek as to how animal law is evolving in the US, with an understanding that in each of our countries, animals face different problems, and the lawyers representing them have to come up with different solutions based on your laws and your culture. For those of you who know me, and I'm sure Tony is smiling as I speak now, that's Deja. Deja's my dog. She's the wonder dog. The term companion animals refers to dogs, cats, horses in some instances. Some instances they're companion animals, in other instances they're farmed animals. Captive fish, captive birds, and a host of other animals who live directly with human beings. The average American tends to view their companion animals as family more than mere property, and I would imagine that most of the people on this webinar agree with that. But if a companion animal is injured or killed, the general rule followed by courts is that the owner of that animal is limited to recovering the market value of that animal. And that's a huge hurdle for those trying to sue to get compensation to the owner for that animal. The most difficult hurdle they face is convincing the judge that the animal is worth more than mere market value. And animal lawyers have tried a variety of approaches to get judges to increase the value of an animal's life. And why are they doing that? They're doing that because tort law is based on the supposition that if you make it more expensive to make a mistake or do it or have a tort, do a tort, then people will be more mindful of what they're doing. And it's also, of course, to compensate the individual for the loss. So they've tried a number of things, as you can see from the slide. Fair market value is the rule. They've tried to argue that animals have intrinsic value, special value, sentimental value, that the defendant should pay the cost to repair the item, which is rather strange, but we're talking about veterinary costs to bring the animal back to health. Value of the animal to the owner is the most difficult value to get judges to agree to, and most of the time these efforts do fail. But I do want to give you an instance in which, and I've gone too far. Oh, okay, but here's a case in which they did prevail. It's Bluestone versus Bergstrom. It's a California case from 2004. And in that case, the plaintiff, the animal owner, loved his dog. He had a mixed breed dog named Shane. Shane was taken to the veterinarian and misdiagnosed, and as a result, he ended up dying of liver failure. And his owner took a lawsuit to court, and it went to a jury, and the jury awarded the owner $30,000 for Shane's unique, and that's US dollars, for Shane's, quote, unique or special value to his owner, even though the jury admitted that if they had been confined to market value, Shane would have been worth about $10. His owner also received $9,000 for medical bills, i.e. the cost to repair or attempt to repair. And this finding of special value is highly unusual in US cases, but it does show us at least one judge who was trying to find a way to compensate an owner who had lost a beloved companion animal, an animal who was irreplaceable to that owner. Special value, intrinsic value, sentimental value, these terms change according to the jurisdiction you're in the US according to the state you're in. But what we're just beginning to see is judges grappling with whether a human who has a close relationship with an animal deserves to be compensated for the loss of that animal. And as I said before, and I should caution, most animal tort cases don't result in anything near this kind of recovery. But we're working on it and have been for 50 years. What we see in these animal companion cases is a fascinating gap between how our legal system treats animals and how a growing number of human individuals view the animals who live with them. And this is part of what makes practicing animal law both rewarding and very frustrating. It is constantly developing. It's like an island that's being formed from volcanic action, and it's developing all the time and changing all the time. There's nothing static about it. Today, we accomplish results we could not have accomplished 20 years ago. 20 years from now, we'll be accomplishing results we couldn't have accomplished today. I'd like to now show you, and you don't have to read this whole thing. I just wanted you to see a sample of one state's anti-cruelty law. They're all fairly similar. Every person who overdrives, overloads, drives, overworks, tortures, torments, blah, 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 an animal is guilty of a crime that's punishable. And a common problem we see in the US is that even though all 50 states have these laws in one form or another, and they're usually fairly similar to this, companion animals are sometimes abused, neglected, either by the people who own them or by other people. Cruelty is the underbelly of the widespread ownership of animals. And in too many instances, animals are crushed, stabbed, beaten, dragged behind cars, and a host of other very sad, tragic, and brutal abuses. So in this slide, just quickly review what a standard state cruelty law is. I will note California is a very liberal state in the US, and so the fines that you see at the bottom and in the imprisonment are stricter, are more stringent than you would see in a state like, for example, Kentucky or Mississippi or some other state. I visited Australia some years ago. Happily, I'd love to go back. And I was interested and pleased to see that lawyers there were actually prosecuting cruelty cases. In my country, with very few exceptions, a lawyer like me, who is not an employee of the state, cannot prosecute a cruelty case. And that really ties our hands, but not completely. What we discovered we can do, even though we can't prosecute those cases, we can do two things. One is we can work with lobbyists to strengthen cruelty laws, to give them provisions that will help the prosecutors more aggressively enforce those laws. Provisions such as forfeiture, the animal must be forfeited, or cost of care bonds, cost of care bonds, in which if the animal has been injured, the person who has injured the animal must pay the costs to bring the animal back to health. And felony provisions, as you see in this California law. So we've worked to strengthen laws. The other thing we've worked to do is to offer pro bono advice and help to prosecutors, and we do it quietly in the background. We will do legal research for them, help write briefs, find expert witnesses, whatever it takes to help them get a conviction. And we've also done trainings with prosecutors, with judges, and with police officers to help them understand the best practices in the investigation and prosecution of animal abusers. And as a result, this has taken several decades, but as a result, we are seeing more aggressive prosecutions and convictions happening with animal abusers. There was a very high-profile case some years ago involving dogfighting. And dogfighting has really, it started in the U.S. when our country started. It's been going on forever. It's now illegal, but most of the time prosecutors were ignoring it. Most people don't know it even exists. There was a high-profile case, as I mentioned. I should have told you ahead of time. Graphic pictures. This case involved a well-known football player, and you see a picture of him there. His name is Michael Vick. And football, American football, not your football. Dogs who are forced to fight, as you can see, live very violent, horrible, brutal lives and violent deaths. The actual dog fights involve illegal gambling, illegal possession of weapons, narcotics, and there are a variety of crimes going on. But the one we're concerned about is what's happening to these dogs. It's also hard to track down dogfighting because it's clandestine. It's often conducted in rural areas, and the locations change frequently. Until this case, as I mentioned, prosecutors did not pay attention to dogfighting, even though it's illegal. And that changed because Michael Vick was high profile, because he was a celebrity. And therefore, this was covered in media all across the US. Secondly, this was the first time that a lot of Americans were hearing about dogfighting, and they were shocked and they were disgusted by it. Americans love their dogs, and they don't want them to be tortured and killed. So Michael Vick was convicted, and he was sent to prison. He was convicted using this federal law rather than the state law. He was sent to prison for 2 years, and that in and of itself is highly unusual. And another notable thing about this case is that prior to this case, when there was a dog fighting case, the dogs, if they were removed from the defendant, they would all be killed because it was assumed they couldn't be placed into homes. They were too damaged emotionally as well as otherwise. But in this case, the court appointed a law professor, an animal law professor named Rebecca Huss. Maybe some of you know Rebecca. And she was a special master, and she oversaw an investigation of the temperaments of these dogs. And as a result, all of these dogs survived. None of them was put down. Most of them could be placed into homes, and the rest of them went to Best Friends Animal Sanctuary, where they were able to live out the rest of their lives being cared for. Now, those are just two of many, many legal issues involving animals, but I want to move on because of the short amount of time we have. Another graphic photo coming up. I want to turn our attention to the protection of wild animals. They face threats from hunting, trapping, the destruction of their habitat, all of this caused by human beings. In my country, only 3% of people actually hunt, but it's a revered and protected practice. I can't tell you why. Well, I could, but wild animals are considered a resource to be used, to be managed. Certain wild animals, such as deer and squirrels and a variety of other animals, are classified as game animals. And that means that state fish and wildlife agencies set seasons for when they can be hunted, and limit the means by which they can be killed to supposedly more humane means. But frankly, bow and arrow is not a humane means for killing. Clearly, these animals have nowhere near the level of legal protection that companion animals have. In most countries, hunting and trapping are the norm, and laws that protect humans do not protect the animals. And that's not going to change until society changes how they view these animals. If they're viewed as a resource, if it's, oh, isn't this a fun thing to do, kill baby elephants, then it's going to continue to be done. In African countries, wildlife are subject to poaching and trophy hunting, which causes serious losses not only to the populations, but to the individuals within those populations. It disrupts their very close-knit communities. I look at this photo and I see it as a tragic loss of 2 lives, but the guys standing behind them with the guns are very proud of themselves, which I think is quite disgusting and says about us human beings that we have a long way to go. I'd like to move on to factory farming, and I don't like to call it factory farming because it is not farming. The largest group of animals on the planet who live and die are farmed animals. And it's no coincidence that farmed animals have the least amount of protection of all animals. Currently, there is an estimated 9 billion farmed animals in the US who are raised and killed on an annual basis. That number is 70 billion raised and killed per year worldwide. And that dwarfs every other use of animals. In the US, most of these animals are kept in industrial factories, and I'm talking about 95% of them. There is no federal law that covers these animals while they are in this situation you're looking at. None, doesn't exist. That's how powerful the meat industry is. The majority of state anti-cruelty laws exempt these animals. Now, there is a federal transport law, which is completely unenforced and has been for decades, and there is a federal Humane Slaughter Act, which is underenforced and full of loopholes. But I want to say once again, for 99% of their lives, these animals have no legal protections. This is a very significant and challenging problem, and it's a global problem because this is spreading to other countries. It's already spread to Europe, Australia, New Zealand. It is coming to Africa and India. As I will say repeatedly throughout this talk, animals are property, and as such, the law provides us with no way to sue for their pain and suffering. And in the realm of farmed animal protection, we are forced to come up with legal theories that are really rather roundabout, but it's the best that we can do at this point in time. So I'd like to tell you about one case that is very current and has just recently been filed. At the Center for Animal Law Studies, we have a clinic, an animal law litigation clinic. It's led by Delcy Winders. The term downed animal refers to any farmed animal who is too sick or too injured to walk into the slaughterhouse. And each year in the US, about 1/2 million pigs arrive at slaughterhouses unable to walk to their own death. Slaughterhouse employees are pressured to move these animals very quickly into the kill floor, and they will kick them and beat them and electroshock them, whatever it takes to get them there, which is brutal and very disturbing to the animals. In 2002, our federal Congress realized that putting downed animals into the food system is a dangerous thing to do. So it passed a law that mandated that the US Department of Agriculture, which is a federal agency that oversees slaughter, that the USDA must investigate downed livestock, must report back to Congress, and then must draft regulations to deal with the problem. It is now 2020, 18 years later, and the USDA has done nothing, which for those of us who know the USDA is not at all surprising. The Center for Animal Law Studies litigation clinic has then submitted a petition for rulemaking, which is the first step that they had to take administratively. The USDA denied their petition, and then earlier this year they filed a lawsuit challenging the USDA for allowing downed animals into the food supply. We don't know how that lawsuit's going to pan out, but I'm very interested to watch it. Here's another approach that animal activists and organizations have used. And I'm showing you now the carton of eggs, of a dozen eggs, put out by, or produced by Judy's Family Farm. And you'll see that the chicken and her chicks are roaming in a lovely field. And I want to assure you that we do dress our children that way in Oregon. Very, very quaint. And what we used in this instance is consumer protection laws to attack what is false labeling of animal products. And if you look at the labels, and I can't quite see it there because we're looking over, I can't quite see, but hens are raised in wide open spaces in Sonoma Valley where they are free to roam, scratch, and play. So something to that effect. And that is what Judy's Eggs actually looks like. That and a number of other buildings. The chickens, the egg-laying hens, are inside the buildings. They are not outside. They are not roaming, scratching, and playing. They have no fresh air or sunlight. They are crowded together. They're living in their own feces and urine, and there are no bugs or grass or any ability to exhibit their natural behaviors. This deceptive packaging that you just saw allows Judy's to profit from misleading consumers, well-intentioned consumers who want to buy eggs from chickens who actually do get to be outdoors and have a nicer lifestyle. They'll pay more for those eggs, thinking that that's what they're getting, when in fact they're not. So an NGO that I established, an Animal Legal Defense Fund, brought a lawsuit alleging that what Judy's was doing constitutes unfair and deceptive advertising and marketing in violation of the laws I've listed there. These are all California laws. ALDF filed this lawsuit as a class action suit on behalf of all consumers who had bought and paid a higher price for Judy's Eggs. This approach was intended to give a strong signal to the industry that misrepresentations about animal welfare will not be tolerated. And I have to tell you, the misrepresentations are rampant. Many within the animal production industry use these kinds of misrepresentations, and the public simply doesn't know how wrong they are. In this case, the result was that the case settled, and Judy stopped using the advertising with the hens and took out the language and took out the chicken graphic. And they agreed to pay fairly large settlement amounts, $200,000, which included a donation to a local humane society to build a chicken rescue facility, as well as $155,000 in attorney's fees. And they agreed to make structural changes to the barns. The hens would not get out, but they agreed to give them more room. The abuse of farmed animals is really a global problem. The US is far behind Europe in passing laws to protect farmed animals. Now, I know in Europe, the laws are much better than the US. I'm told that the enforcement is lacking. China is now raising 10 times as many farmed animals as we raise in the US, and the intensive confinement system that exists in the US is there as well. As I said earlier, it is moving into Africa and India. And so for me, when I'm teaching people who are coming from other countries, I want them to know about this system, and particularly in Africa and India, it is coming to you and you need to know how to deal with it because it's going to be abysmal for the animals. Having gone through that, and I really have jumped through a lot, litigation is just one aspect of animal law. And I realize that, yes, Americans are quite litigious and that system doesn't work in other countries. But I will tell you, in the early days of animal law, we really didn't consciously realize that we were building a movement. It took us a while to get that news. We were bringing lawsuits, and people started wanting to help us out. And we realized that lawsuits were only a part of what we were to do and what we needed to focus on. For one thing, we needed to focus on improving laws because we needed those laws in order to bring those lawsuits. We needed them stronger, more specific, and to help us better able to provide protections to the animals. But we also realized that we were creating a field of the law, and that we could bring that into law schools. And it was a concerted effort, and it still is. But it wasn't as hard as you might think. Law schools are open to new fields of the law and to new ways of thinking. And animal law is now taught in about 165 law schools in the US. It's taught in a number of law schools in Australia and in Canada, and it's finding its way to other countries as well. There are student chapters in over 200 law schools in the US, and the students in these chapters do a lot of things. They host film screenings, they table materials, they do legal research for attorneys, they do a variety of things that enable them to help the animals. Today, there are case books, there are horn books, there are law reviews, there's a variety of legal materials on animal law that didn't exist 30 years ago. There are clerkships and internships and fellowships with most of the national American animal NGOs. Students and graduates can learn to practice animal law from attorneys who are experts. And that is what we're hoping will appear in other countries as well. And that's why I'm so excited about the work that Amy and the others are doing. The Center for Animal Law Studies offers the only world-class animal law education. And as you can see on this screen, we've got 26 separate animal law classes that a student can take when they come to Portland. We also have 3 clinics: an animal law policy clinic, the animal law litigation clinic that I mentioned, and our newest clinic is an international wildlife law clinic headed by Professor Erica Lyman. We have an animal law review, we have an annual conference, and the only LLM program in the world, and that's where Amy Wilson and Tony Gerens received their LLM. I'm very proud of that program. I feel that that's where I want to put most of my energies in, to teach people who will then go back to their countries and bring animal law to their countries and carry on the work that we've started here. If you are interested in this program, please take a look at the bottom and go to that link, find out more about our program. If you would like to come to us to earn your JD or take the 1-year LLM program, we would love to have you. Because of COVID, unfortunately, we're not bringing in students from foreign countries this year. I ardently hope that next year that will change. Before I close, and hopefully I haven't gone too long, I've tried to shorten this. Before I close, I want to mention the fight for animal rights. All of the lawsuits, there we go, love that picture. All of the lawsuits and legislation I've discussed are in the realm of animal protection, but the animal law movement is also focused on the critical issue of animal rights. And the most well-known of the legal advocates for animal rights is Stephen Wise, who goes back to the beginning of animal law as a dear old friend. He heads the Non-Human Rights Project, and through his books and his talks all over the world, he has made the debate for legal rights into a conversation that's not going to go away, challenging the very status quo of the underpinnings of how we treat animals. He argues that non-human animals have interests and capacities which call upon us to offer them legal rights to protect their fundamental interests in life and bodily integrity. And I encourage you to visit the website of the Non-Human Rights Project. I've included that there to learn more about their critically important work. Their lawsuits have not yet achieved desired court holdings in the US, but they are doing such impressive work. And sometimes when you point the arrow in one place, you find that someplace else in the world, they're listening. Before we open for questions, I'd like to just offer you one final thought, and that is that for thousands of years, human beings have had a relationship with animals that has been built on us using them, viewing them as commodities, as resources, as things. And by doing that, we profit monetarily and otherwise. And our technology has advanced, and so today we are using far greater numbers of animals far more efficiently. Entire industries are dependent upon animal abuse. And so when you think about the task we have at hand, understand we are fighting entire industries, we are fighting thousands of years of thinking. A small number of us have evolved past that way of looking at animals. Science has advanced, and we can no longer ignore that animals have complex social lives, similar to ours in many ways, and we need to begin to see them as they really are, and treat them accordingly. If you look into their eyes, understand that someone is looking back. It's up to us to attack this age-old injustice and reframe our relationships as a society and as multiple societies with other animals. And it's really an extraordinary path that I want to invite you on. And thank you for listening. And we're going to open now for questions. Correct, Amy? Oh,
Yes.
thanks. Yes. Okay.
Great. Oh, there's an echo. Thank you so much, Joyce. That was a very interesting presentation. We've got a bunch of questions already, so we're going to try and get through some of them. I'm going to start in the order that we received them from Patricia. She said, "Dear Joyce, want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk about animal law. Was wondering if you think there is a link between religion and how we treat or interact with non-human animals. In Christianity, for example, we are told that humans literally have dominion over them. It might be one of the reasons why we feel we can treat them the way as a means to an end and not as amazing sentient beings they are."
Yes, thank you. Good question, wonderful question. Yes, religion does play into how we treat animals, and Christianity is a big part of that, although I must say that other religions are not far ahead of Christianity, except for Buddhism and Jainism. If people believe that God ordained that they can use animals as they wish, then they're going to do that. I would argue that our legal system, at least in my country, is not based on religion. The law and religion are, and I apologize, that's my dog Deja. Religion and law should be separated. And so I would still argue that animals should have legal rights, even if some people believe that the Lord has ordained that we utilize them in any way we wish.
Thanks. And we have a quick...
hopefully Deja will quiet down. Deja!
You can just bring her on and we can...
Yes, Deja dog.
Beautiful.
Come here, honey.
We have a question from Alan. I think, Alan, do you want to ask the question yourself?
Yeah, hi, Joyce.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you ever so much for doing this. We've got a little thing going on over here where we've set up a dedicated animal rights group, practice group within Chambers, and we've been plotting with some of the animal rights organisations to do some private prosecutions. Now, we're looking at either animal offences, but one thing we've considered, and this is very useful with the sort of Joyce's chicken cases, we might get more public support if we go down the consumer protection route, because obviously people got all poor animals, etc., etc. But also over here, you may remember a couple of years ago, there was a scandal about horse meat finding its way into food and things like that. And that really hit the press. So what I'm just wondering is, in your experience, and this is quite a cynical question to ask, which is possibly in terms of, I don't want to say marketing because that's the wrong thing, in terms of campaigning and PR, is it better to go down the animal offences route or the consumer protection route? Because, you know, self-interest may be the thing that actually gets a broader appeal than,
Yes.
than the mere animal rights. So I'm just wondering, because you've got a lot of experience and in different jurisdictions, so any insights you have, very welcome.
Yeah, you're on to a key question, actually, and don't be embarrassed about calling it marketing. You know, it took me years to realize that what we are doing is not only litigating, but we're trying to win hearts and minds and souls. So one thing one has to consider when considering litigation is, how's it going to play out in the media? I know that sounds crass, but really you have to consider that. You use the media. Sometimes in cases that we've brought, it's the media that has helped us to win the case. It's the media that has helped us to do far more than we could have done had we just litigated the case and kept our heads down and not thought about the fact that this is going to get public attention. The other thing is, you're also quite right, and I'm going to be crass again. Human beings are quite narcissistic. What's in it for me? And so I think that when we think about a problem, whatever that problem is, we need to think about attacking it from and I always use this, here's the circle, here's the problem, and we should be thinking about attacking it from every angle we can, with the limitation of, how much money do we have, how much time do we have. And so pick an angle, and other people will pick other angles, hopefully. And if you can all hit at a problem from the variety of angles you can, and by that I mean angles, litigation, legislation, demonstrations, education, variety, different kinds of lawsuit, full court press on a problem, it's going to take time. And it's going to take a lot more time than you wish it would have taken, but you can achieve more by using a variety of techniques and tactics. Did I answer the question, I hope?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, because again, like you say, it don't want to be cynical, but it's tying in. I mean, because we're going down the private prosecution route, we have to be careful about not prejudicing trials, and it's how to use the publicity and how to use that. But it's the same sort of thing, because like you say, just going sometimes after individual organisations about minor, and also the animal offences here, they're small fines. Whereas if you can go for something a bit bigger, a bit more corporate and effectively misleading, and again, we're also encouraging people. We have something called the Advertising Standards Authority here, which monitors all types of advertising, and it's free to put in a complaint to them and a report. So we're sort of encouraging people, a bit like the chicken case, just and in a way it is almost like harassment, but it's just keep hitting until people modify. But I was just curious as to what you thought about whether, what, like you say, what was the most appealing from a cynical point of view to actually draw attention. And
I do have to stress, though, that if you go for the advertising, all you're going to correct is the advertising. So that is the media approach. You'll correct the advertising. You'll bring it to the public's attention that, oh, wait a minute, we're being led astray. We're being lied to. It won't directly impact the animals. So that's the limitation of the advertising approach. But I think it should be used with a variety of other approaches. And it all has to be done. You have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, thank you. That's really, really helpful, actually. Thank you.
Okay, good luck.
Great, thanks, Ellen. And that leads well into our next question from Brett. He said, Judy's egg/consumer protection lawsuits, did they have an impact on the sales or the number of eggs bought?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I do not. I can only say that based on how Judy's responded, we scared them. They did not. They wanted us to go away and stop and stop our media approach. So I don't know. I can't confirm if their sales were impacted ultimately, but they must have thought so.
Great. So we have a question from Nika. With regards to factory farming, does this extend to the beauty industry? How do we sort out the companies that lie to consumers and those that actually do adhere to welfare considerations?
Good luck. Really, I don't know. I've seen so many lies and so many examples of lies. Tyson, one of the biggest producers, uses advertising that is false and misleading all the time. And they do it because they know they can get away with it. And Purdue and all of these producers, if you don't trust them, then don't buy their product. It's the only thing I can say, because I can't tell you who is actually producing meat or dairy or eggs in a humane manner. You would have to go to their facility, see how the animals are treated, and then you also have to consider the slaughter of the animals, and they're not going to let you in. In my country, you can't get into an industrial animal farm. Facility, not farm. You can't get into a slaughterhouse. Now, in other countries, some of you may be able to get into those facilities, and if you can, I encourage you to do so. It's not going to be a happy day, but you will learn a lot.
Thanks. So we actually have a ton of questions, so we're not going to get through all of them, unfortunately. We have a question here from Ruby about legal personhood. She's familiar with the work of the NHRP. Looking to the future, if all sentient animals are recognized as legal persons under legislation, would there still be a need for anti-cruelty legislation? What would a statute that recognizes legal personhood for animals look like? Good luck.
You know, and I apologize for my lack of vision, but it is so hard to see what that would look like. I mean, we could draft that legislation, but what would be the outcome of it? It would be so viciously fought by so many people. You know, the world that we live in right now is a world in which the life for animals, most animals, is one of suffering and one of use and abuse. And I'm talking about farmed animals because there are so many of them. We have many steps to go before we will see a time when we don't need anti-cruelty laws, because of all the legislation that we have at this point in time, and this is the dark age, okay? At this point in time, anti-cruelty laws are the best laws we have on the book, and they're books rather, and they are highly imperfect. So it is hard for me to see a time when we wouldn't need them. That would be a time when we weren't using animals, well, even beyond that, even if we weren't using animals, we still might have companion animals. I know that's an issue that some people will debate. Maybe we shouldn't have companion animals. It would be a lovely world. If I ruled the world, that would be the world, but I don't. And I think we're decades and decades away from that world. Maybe hundreds of years, maybe a century.
Thank you, Joyce.
Sorry to be so depressing.
No, I think it's realistic, especially working in this area. You've seen how hard how long it's taken to get things done. So, great.
I mean, if we compare, we're in a social movement, and compare us to other social movements, and look at how difficult it is and how long it takes for a social movement to make progress. And in America, we have this horrible history of racism. And it started when the first Africans were kidnapped and brought to my country and put into slavery, put into chains. And here we are 400 years later. And if you've been reading about what's going on in the United States, my God, it's 400 years later. What the heck? Isn't enough? And yet for too many Americans, no, they are still very racist. So that is the world we live with.
Thanks, Joyce. We have a question about the South African context and the African perspective. So I think that's going to be a whole separate webinar. Of course, we really want to educate people about what's going on in South Africa. There is, of course, a lot of overlap, but we also have some very unique circumstances. So I think, Brett, we will be hosting our next webinar soon, and we'll be able to provide more information to that question. So while we have Joyce here, we're going to move to the next question. Having stricter laws is most certainly, sorry, it's from Dabria, and I believe she's joining us from Sri Lanka. I might be mistaken. Having stricter laws is most certainly a good sign of progress for animal welfare and animal rights. However, without enforcing these laws, I suppose countries aren't exactly moving forward. How can we enforce these laws or push for governments to enforce these laws?
You're absolutely right, and I think that's what I'm hearing is happening in the EU, where they've got some really great laws on the books in the directives about farmed animals, and yet there's a lack of enforcement. And so that gets back to the other things that we must do. Just litigating is not enough. Just passing legislation is never enough. Our work and the work of the larger movement for animal protection and animal rights is to educate, demonstrate, bring this to the public constantly in a variety of ways. Now, how one brings it to the public is going to differ based on the culture you're in and the country you're in. If you're in China, for example, it's going to be quite different than what you would be able to do in a country like mine. At least I hope mine stays as a democratic country. It's going downhill. So what I would do in my country would be to run media campaigns and get celebrities to speak up for the animals and teach animal law and bring it out in as many ways as I could, so that the public would begin to know that, you know, these laws were passed and they were passed by our legislature, and yet they're not being enforced. Who's responsible for enforcing them? Come on, do your job. again, each campaign takes an enormous amount of time. And I keep saying that. And I hope by saying that I'm not causing you to be hopeless. I was born a hopeful person, and frankly, that quality has served me well. And we need to stay hopeful. We need to keep just banging away at it until we get through.
Great, thank you. I think we probably have time just for one. We have so many exciting questions. What I'm going to do is extract them, and then hopefully we can deal with some of these after. One of the ones I think we haven't potentially dealt with is, can a human's being, it's from Boitmela, can a human being's right to be infringed in order to protect an animal or slaughtering an animal for traditional / custom purpose?
Okay, so now if I'm correct, you're talking about ritual slaughter. Is that what that question's about?
Yes, basically, and the human rights, how are human beings' rights affected or impacted by considering the animal's interests?
At this point in the United States, ritual slaughter is preferred over the animal's well-being. And I'll talk a bit about kosher slaughter, if I might. Kosher slaughter, as it was originally conducted, meant holding the animal down on the ground and slitting the animal's throat, slitting the carotid artery. It was not any worse than any other kind of slaughter. I mean, slaughter. If you're doing it, the animal's going to die, and it's very difficult. But when it came to the United States or other countries where there were health laws, techniques were developed such that the animal would not be held on the ground. Those techniques, pre-slaughter, have been very cruel to the animals. The technique of chaining the animal by a rear leg and hoisting the animal up is cruel. There's no way of getting around it. And yet the lawsuits that have occurred over that have not benefited the animals. Basically, and I think it's contradictory, basically what the lawsuits have said is humans have rights, freedom of religion is a First Amendment right in my country, and animals don't have rights, animals are things, and therefore this will continue unabated. I'm noticing that in other countries, ritual slaughter is being challenged, and I think that's very interesting. I think that's movement on the part of the leaders of those countries to suggest that some human rights, even the very basic human right of freedom of religion, can be set aside if they involve cruel practices. So that's developing. It's an interesting part of the equation.
Great. So unfortunately, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We just have a couple minutes. So of course, I wanted to say a huge thank you to our amazing speaker, Joyce, and for every single one of you for joining. As you can see, it's a very exciting field of law, and it's really a huge topic to cover in such a short amount of time. So we encourage you to do further research. We have a number of resources on our website. You've got the CAL's website as well. We've given you Joyce's email as well as my email. So please reach out to us and look online. We're always looking for people to be involved and to help. We have so much work, and we need a lot of hands. So we hope that you've learned a lot, and please feel free to reach out to us, and please unmute yourselves and join me in giving a real round of applause to Professor Joyce Tischler.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone, and stay healthy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Be safe.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
I hope we can see you in person someday soon.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.